Tate jotted the number down, his mind racing. This wasn't just a one-time deal, he muttered to Bowman. This guy might have a whole operation. The detectives escorted Irina out of the station, assuring her they would keep her informed as the case progressed. As soon as she was gone, Tate turned to Bowman. If he's done this before, there has to be a trail, financial records, payments, something. Let's see what forensics can dig up. Later that evening, armed with the new information, the detectives brought Elena back in for questioning. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but the picture they formed was darker and more twisted than either of them could have imagined. Ask, explain. Detective Tate was on the phone with the forensic lead when it happened. A discovery that would shift the entire trajectory of their investigation. Hidden behind a stack of dusty books in the master bedroom closet, almost invisible to the untrained eye, sat a small, inconspicuous safe. A safe? Tate repeated, his tone sharpening as he processed the news. Can you open it? We're working on it now, the lead replied. Looks like it hasn't been touched in years. Within an hour, the team cracked the lock. Inside, they found an assortment of documents, letters, receipts, and something far more intriguing, unfiled adoption papers for Lilia Milton. Bowman stared at the scanned copies sent to her desk, her brow furrowing deeper with each passing second. Unfiled, she muttered aloud, her voice laced with disbelief. What the hell does that mean? Tate leaned over her shoulder, his expression darkening. It means something about this adoption wasn't on the level. As the detectives sifted through the revelations of the day, a troubling new layer of the case began to emerge. Marcus Milton wasn't just a man with a history of violence, he was a man with secrets. And as they spread the yellowed, creased papers across Bowman's desk, one thing became chillingly clear. This case was about to take a much darker turn. The adoption documents bore no official seals or state approvals, just Marcus Milton's signature, alongside a witness signature that forensics quickly identified as forged. It was the break Tate and Bowman had been waiting for, but it opened the door to a far more convoluted and sinister web than either of them had anticipated. Unfiled adoption documents, Bowman said again, pacing their cramped office. That explains why nothing showed up in social services records. Lilia wasn't legally his daughter. Tate leaned against the edge of his desk, arms crossed. Which means we're not just dealing with child abuse and homicide. We've got fraud, trafficking, and who knows what else. Bowman's phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. She glanced at the screen, then at Tate. Forensics traced a name from the documents. Irina Davis. She's listed as Lilia's biological mother. Irina Davis, Tate repeated, scribbling the name into his notebook. Let's bring her in. An hour later, Irina Davis arrived at the precinct. Her apprehension was palpable, the way she clutched her bag tightly, her knuckles white, her eyes darting around the room. She was young, barely in her late 20s, with tired features and hands that trembled slightly as she sat down across from the detectives in the interview room. Miss Davis, Bowman began gently, sliding a copy of the adoption documents across the table. We need your help to understand what happened here. Did you know Marcus Milton? Irina's eyes locked onto the papers, her face paling instantly. Her voice wavered as she spoke. I knew him, years ago. He said he was helping families adopt children. Why are you asking about this now? Bowman's tone softened further. The child in question, Lilia Milton, has been hurt. We need to know how she ended up with Marcus. Irina froze, the color draining from her cheeks. Hurt? What do you mean? Tate leaned forward, his voice steady but firm. Irina, Lilia was hospitalized with severe injuries. She passed away yesterday. Irina's reaction was immediate. Her hands flew to her face, muffling a horrified gasp. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she rocked slightly in her seat. No, she whispered, shaking her head. No. That's not possible. He said she'd be safe. He promised. Tate and Bowman exchanged a glance. Tate pressed gently. Who promised? Irina. Was it Marcus? She nodded, her voice trembling. Yes. I was 19. I just left home, and I had nothing. I found out I was pregnant, and I panicked. He told me he could help. He said he worked with families who couldn't have kids and wanted to adopt. He seemed kind. Bowman's expression softened, though her tone remained focused. What happened next? Irina swallowed hard, her hands gripping the edge of the table. He gave me papers to sign. He said they were for the adoption process, that my baby would go to a good home. I didn't know anything about the law or how adoptions worked. I just wanted her to have a chance at a better life. Bowman frowned. Did he mention who the family was? Did you ever meet them? No, Irina replied, shaking her head. He told me it was a private arrangement and that the family didn't want to be involved until everything was finalized. I believed him. Tate leaned back, his expression darkening. Irina, those papers weren't legal. Lilia never went to another family. Marcus kept her himself. The finality of his words seemed to crush Irina. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. After a few moments, she looked up, her face streaked with tears. Why would he do that? Why would he lie? That's what we're trying to figure out, Tate said. But we need your help. Did he ever ask for money? Mention other children? Irina furrowed her brow, thinking back. He asked for a fee. Said it was for legal costs and paperwork. I gave him everything I had. But it wasn't much. As for other children, he mentioned helping a few families before me. But I didn't ask questions. Bowman pressed gently. Do you remember how much you gave him? A little over $1,000, Irina replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Tate jotted the number in his notebook, his mind racing. This wasn't just a one-time deal, he muttered to Bowman. This guy might have a whole operation. The detectives escorted Irina out of the station, assuring her they would keep her informed as the case progressed. As soon as she was gone, Tate turned to Bowman. If he's done this before, there has to be a trail. Financial records, payments, something. Let's see what forensics can dig up. Later that evening, armed with the new information, the detectives brought Elena back in for questioning. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, but the picture they formed was darker and more twisted than either of them could have imagined. Elena Bowman's voice sliced through the tension like a blade, her demeanor as fragile yet pointed as ever. We know about the adoption, she began, her gaze fixed on Elena. Lilia wasn't legally Marcus's daughter. Elena's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. What? No, that's not true. He told me everything was taken care of. It wasn't, Tate interjected firmly, leaning forward. And we need to know if you were involved in any of it. I didn't know, Elena cried, her voice trembling. I swear. I thought it was all real. Marcus handled everything. He always said I didn't need to worry about the details. Bowman leaned closer, her tone sharp but not unkind. Elena, if Marcus lied about the adoption, what else is he hiding? You need to start being honest with us. For Lilia's sake. Elena hesitated, her gaze darting toward the door as though Marcus might storm in at any moment. Finally, she took a shaky breath and whispered. He hurt her. He hurt Lilia a lot. I wanted to stop him, but I couldn't. He said if I ever told anyone, I'd be next. Tate's jaw tightened, and Bowman's expression hardened. The revelation, though not entirely unexpected, landed like a gut punch. Elena, Bowman said softly. You need to tell us everything if you want to help Lilia. This is your chance. Elena broke down, her sobs filling the room. I didn't do anything to protect her, she choked out. I let him hurt her. I was too scared. Tate's voice was firm but steady. We can't change what happened, but we can make sure he pays for it. Will you help us? She nodded through her tears, her voice barely audible. Yes. The detectives left the room, the weight of the case pressing heavily on their shoulders as they prepared to take Elena's full statement. Bowman turned to Tate, her expression grim. This isn't just a broken home, Tate. This is a broken system. And we're only scratching the surface. Detectives Tate and Bowman sat across from Marcus Milton in the interrogation room, the unfiled adoption documents spread out on the table like evidence of betrayal. The once unflappable Marcus shifted slightly in his chair, his fingers drumming a nervous rhythm on the metal surface. His calm, collected demeanor remained intact, but the tension in his jaw betrayed him. "These documents tell a very different story than the one you've been giving us, Marcus," Tate began, his voice steady but firm. "Lilia's adoption was never finalized. In fact, it was never legal." Marcus smirked, leaning back in his chair. "So what are you saying? It's a crime to take in a child who needed a home?" "Irina knew exactly what she was doing when she gave Lilia to me." "She gave her to you?" Bowman interjected sharply. "That's not how adoption works, and you know it. Irina trusted you to follow through on a legal process, not forge papers and keep the child for yourself." Marcus shrugged, his arrogance unwavering. "Irina was in no position to care for a kid. She didn't want her. She practically begged me to take her. What was I supposed to do? Let her grow up in foster care?" Tate slammed his hand on the table, causing Marcus to flinch slightly. "Don't try to spin this like you're some kind of savior. You manipulated a vulnerable young woman and exploited the system to serve your own twisted needs. And now Lilia is dead because of you." Marcus's expression hardened. "I didn't kill her. You don't have anything tying me to her injuries." Bowman leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "You're right, for now. But let's talk about what we do have. Drug paraphernalia littering the apartment, witnesses hearing screams, and now a paper trail of illegal activity that points directly to you. You're running out of places to hide, Marcus." Before they could press further, Marcus's lawyer, a middle-aged man with a slick demeanor, knocked on the glass and gestured to interrupt. "This conversation is over," he announced as he entered the room. "Detectives, you're clearly trying to railroad my client without sufficient evidence. Any further questioning will be considered harassment." Tate and Bowman exchanged a look before stepping outside. That evening, Tate and Bowman convened with the forensic team to review Marcus's financial records. A tense silence filled the room as the lead forensic analyst, Kim, scrolled through highlighted transactions. "Here's what we found," Kim began, pointing to several flagged payments. Marcus made a series of cash deposits over the past 5 years. All of them correspond to times when children were placed in private adoptions. "Private adoptions?" Tate asked, his brow furrowing. "Unofficial," Kim clarified. "There's no legal documentation for these kids, just like Lilia. But the pattern's consistent. He was profiting off these arrangements." Bowman's jaw tightened. "So we're looking at more than just one child. How many?" "From what we've pieced together so far, at least 2 others," Kim replied. "But it's possible there are more. We'll need time to dig deeper." Tate exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. This just keeps getting worse. He wasn't just a bad parent. He was running an operation. As the detectives processed the new information, Bowman's phone buzzed. It was a message from a social worker reviewing Lilia's case file. "Marcus's lawyer is trying to block access to all records," she read aloud. "He's claiming it violates client privilege." Tate's expression darkened. "We need to get ahead of this. If he's trying to cover his tracks, it means we're onto something big." Detectives Tate and Bowman sat in the precinct conference room, where stacks of documents, photos, and evidence filled the table. The case had taken on a sprawling life of its own, and every new discovery seemed to uncover a deeper layer of deception. That afternoon, their efforts took a pivotal turn when a young man named Evan stepped into the room. Clad in a wrinkled button-down shirt and clutching a file folder, he introduced himself as a former paralegal from Marcus Milton's previous law firm. "I don't think you realize how deep this goes," Evan began, his voice shaking but resolute. "Marcus has been playing the system for years. These files..." He opened the folder, revealing damning evidence of forged documents, illicit payments, and names of other children caught in Marcus's web. Bowman and Tate exchanged a glance. They weren't just chasing justice for Lilia anymore. They were unraveling a network of corruption that stretched farther than they'd imagined. And as Evan laid out the pieces, one thing became clear. Marcus Milton wasn't just a predator. He was a kingpin. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, They felt like they had the upper hand. Know if this will help, but I couldn't stay silent anymore. Evan began, his voice wavering. Tate motioned for him to sit down. Start from the beginning, he said firmly. Evan hesitated, taking a deep breath. Marcus wasn't just your run-of-the-mill lawyer. He ran a side operation for years. I helped process documents for private adoptions, but there were always inconsistencies. Birth certificates would change. Social security numbers didn't line up and payments came from untraceable sources. When I questioned it, Marcus told me to keep my head down if I wanted to keep my job. He opened the folder revealing copies of altered adoption forms, payment records, and emails. These prove he orchestrated illegal adoptions. Lilia wasn't the only child. There were others. Bowman leaned forward, flipping through the documents. How many others? Evan G. At least 5, but maybe more. He covered his tracks well. Everything was under the table. Cash payments, bribes to officials, and false promises to desperate mothers like Anina Davis. Arena's anguish weighed heavily on the detectives. They had brought her in earlier to share more about her experience, seated across from Bowman. Her voice cracked as she recounted her brief time with Lilia. She was perfect, Arena, perfect, said, her hands clutching the edge of her chair. She had this laugh, it could light up a whole room. I used to rock her to sleep and hum the same lullaby my mom sang to me. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Her eyes filled with tears. I thought I was giving her a better life. I thought Marcus was someone who cared. I was wrong. Bowman nodded gently, offering her a tissue. Irina, your story is important. Lilia's story deserves to be heard, and with your help, we can make sure no one else falls victim to Marcus's lies. While Irina opened a window into the past, Elena provided a grim view of Marcus' actions behind closed doors in another round of questioning. She admitted she had been complicit in his crimes. I knew what he was doing, she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. He would bring these women into our home, promise them everything they wanted to hear, and then once he had their signatures, he'd disappear with the baby. Why didn't you say anything? Tate asked. Elena shook her head, her expression haunted. Because I was scared. He told me if I ever spoke out, he'd ruin me, and he had dirt on everyone. She paused, her voice breaking, including me. I helped him silence those mothers, sometimes with money, sometimes with threats. I didn't want to, but I didn't see a way out. Tate leaned forward, his tone unrelenting. Elena, do you understand what you're admitting to? You were complicit in this operation that makes you a key player in all of this. Elena noted, tears streaming down her face. I know, and I'll pay for it, but I want to help now. As the detectives pieced together the timeline of Lilia's short life, the grim picture became clearer. Forensic reports confirmed repeated injuries over time, indicative of prolonged abuse. Hospital records showed visits for minor injuries that were easily dismissed as accidents, yet in hindsight were part of a pattern. Marcus's negligence wasn't just a one-time lapse. Bowman remarked, her voice steely. It was systematic. He broke her spirit long before her body gave out in the conference room. Tate pinned photos and documents to a large whiteboard, mapping the network of crimes. This is bigger than just Lilia's case, he said. Marcus didn't just fail her as a parent, he used her as a pawn. In a much larger scheme, the morning was overcast as detectives Tate and Bowman prepared to make their move. Weeks of mounting evidence had finally culminated in a warrant for Marcus Milton's arrest. With backup from uniformed officers, the team set out to ensure the operation went off without a hitch. Tate double-checked the address on the warrant as they parked outside Marcus's apartment complex. He's going to fight this every step of the way, Tate said, adjusting his badge on his belt. We need to be ready for anything. Bowman nodded, her face set in determination. We've got enough to pin him. He can't worm his way out of this. The building's exterior was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the media frenzy. Brewing around the case, Tate and Bowman exchanged a glance before Bowman knocked firmly on the apartment door. Marcus Milton. This is the police. Open the door. We have a warrant for your arrest for manslaughter, child endangerment, and falsifying adoption documents. For a moment, there was only silence. Then came the faint sound of footsteps. Bowman knocked again, her voice firmer. This time, Marcus Milton opened the door. Now the lock clicked and the door opened a crack. Marcus stood on the other side, his face composed but his eyes narrowing in suspicion. "What's the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice cold and steady. Tate held up the warrant. "Marcus Milton, you're under arrest for manslaughter, child endangerment, and falsifying adoption documents. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Marcus's expression shifted only slightly, just enough to reveal the flicker of tension he was trying to hide. "This is absurd," he said with a sharp exhale. "I haven't done anything wrong. You can explain that to the judge," Tate replied evenly when Marcus didn't immediately comply. Bowman stepped forward, her hand hovering near her holster. "Turn around, Marcus," she said, her tone sharp now. Reluctantly, Marcus raised his hands and allowed the detectives to cuff him. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice laced with contempt. "This is all just a misunderstanding." As Marcus was escorted out, neighbors began to gather in the hallway, their expressions a mix of shock and curiosity. Some whispered to one another, but most simply stared their faces. Grim, Marcus,